This Bobcat Kitten approached him at dawn. When he followed, he immediately called the police. But what he uncovered in the woods wasn't just an animal in trouble, it was a human life, hanging by a thread, and a secret someone powerful would do anything to hide. A quiet man just trying to live in peace suddenly finds himself caught in a deadly game, where every step into the forest leads deeper into danger. The traps weren't only meant for animals, and now they're closing in on him. Who can he trust when even the law may be working against him? And how far will he go to protect the innocent when the next wrong move could cost him everything? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The first rays of sunlight painted the Ozark Mountains in soft golden hues. As Boone Ellery stepped onto his weathered front porch, coffee mug in hand, the morning air carried the fresh scent of cedar and damp earth, a familiar comfort that usually brought peace to his solitary mornings. But today was different. A small movement caught his trained eye. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than a house cat, padding cautiously toward his porch steps. Boone set his mug down slowly, careful not to startle the young wild animal, his gaze fixed on the silver collar around its neck, reflecting the early morning light. That meant it was part of the wildlife release program, but something wasn't right. The kitten's behavior was erratic, pacing back and forth, letting out small distress sounds that went against every wild instinct these creatures possessed. "Hey there, little one," Boone spoke softly, crouching down. The kitten looked at him with desperate eyes, then darted a few feet toward the tree line before looking back expectantly. Years of reading animal behavior during his wildfire service kicked in. This wasn't random. The kitten wanted him to follow. Without hesitation, Boone grabbed his hiking boots and emergency pack. Old habits die hard. He followed the bobcat's lead as it wove through the dense undergrowth, his experienced feet finding silent purchase on the forest floor. The morning dew soaked through his pants as he pushed through brambles and low-hanging branches. After about 15 minutes of tracking, the kitten led him to a clearing that made his blood run cold. Crude snares hung from low branches, illegal traps that could catch anything from deer to domestic pets. But what stopped his heart was the sight of a woman bound against a thick cedar tree, her head lolling forward. "Ma'am," Boone called out, quickly scanning the area for any immediate threats. Before rushing to her side, her skin was sunburned, lips cracked from dehydration. A hidden trail camera blinked menacingly from a nearby tree. Someone was watching the spot. The woman stirred weakly as he worked to free her from the ropes. "I'm Boone Ellery. You're going to be okay," he assured her, his fingers working quickly at the knots. "Can you tell me your name?" "Tess," she managed to whisper, her voice rough. "Tess Mariner." With one hand still supporting Tess, Boone pulled out his cell phone and dialed emergency services. "This is Boone Ellery off Route 23 in the Ozark National Forest. I've got an emergency situation. Found a woman who's been tied up and abandoned. Need immediate police and medical response." He rattled off coordinates from his GPS app, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest at whoever had done this. The bobcat kitten sat at the edge of the clearing, watching as Boone helped Tess take small sips from his water bottle. In the distance, sirens began to wail their approach through the mountain roads. Boone's jaw set firmly. Someone had turned these peaceful woods into a crime scene, and his years of backcountry experience told him this was just the beginning of something much darker. The wail of approaching sirens shattered the morning quiet. Boone stood protectively near Tess, who sat propped against a fallen log, sipping slowly from his canteen. The bobcat kitten had disappeared back into the underbrush, but evidence of the criminal trap site surrounded them, cruel metal snares glinting in the dappled sunlight. A county patrol vehicle crunched to a stop on the gravel road beyond the tree line. Deputy Ward Clegg emerged, adjusting his crisp uniform with practiced motions. His polished boots barely seemed to touch the ground as he strode toward them, an oddly pleasant smile fixed on his face. "Well now, what do we have here?" Clegg's voice was smooth as honey, but his eyes were sharp and calculating as they swept over the scene. Boone stepped forward. "Deputy, we've got illegal traps. At least a dozen of them. And this woman was..." Now. Clegg cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Miss, are you injured?" He directed his attention to Tess, barely acknowledging Boone's presence. "I was tied up." Tess's voice cracked with indignation. "Look at these ropes, these traps. Someone left me here to die." Clegg's smile didn't waver. "Ma'am, we'll get you checked out, but let's not be dramatic. Probably just some kids playing pranks. You likely wandered into something you didn't understand." Boone felt his jaw tighten. "Deputy, this is serious. These are professional traps. And there's a trail camera. I'll handle the investigation, Mr. Ellery." Clegg interrupted again, his tone carrying a subtle warning. Let's focus on getting the lady some medical attention. Ambulance is right behind me." As if on cue, an ambulance appeared on the road. Two EMTs hurried down the path with their equipment. Clegg smoothly guided Tess toward them, his hand on her elbow steering her away from the trap site. "But the evidence," Tess tried to protest. "We'll take care of everything," Clegg assured her with that same plastic smile. "You just focus on getting checked out." Boone watched helplessly as Tess was led away. She threw him one last desperate look over her shoulder before disappearing through the trees. The EMS helped her into the ambulance, and within minutes, the vehicle pulled away, leaving Boone alone with Deputy Clegg. "I'll need to document this scene," Boone said firmly. "These traps are illegal." "And someone clearly." "That won't be necessary," Clegg cut in. His pleasant demeanor had hardened slightly. "I've got it handled. You've done your good deed for the day, Mr. Ellery. Why don't you head on home?" Something in the deputy's tone made Boone's skin crawl. "I found this site. I should give a statement. Already got what I need." Clegg pulled out his notepad, making a show of reviewing it. "Found a distressed hiker, called it in. Simple as that. We'll take care of the rest. But go home, Mr. Ellery." The warning in Clegg's voice was unmistakable now. Some things are better left to the proper authorities. Boone stood his ground for a moment longer, meeting Clegg's cold stare. Finally, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy with frustration. Something wasn't right about this, but he felt powerless to challenge the deputy's authority. Throughout the day, Boone couldn't shake his unease. As evening approached, he made his decision. He grabbed his flashlight and headed back to the clearing, determined to document the evidence properly this time. But when he arrived, his heart sank. The site had been completely cleared. Every trap, every rope, even the trail camera, all gone. The ground had been swept clean, leaves scattered to cover any signs of disturbance. If he hadn't been there that morning, he would never have known anything had happened here. Boone swept his flashlight beam across the clearing in disbelief. This wasn't just cleaning up a crime scene. This was erasing it. As he moved toward the cedar tree where he'd found Tess, something caught the light. He knelt down, pushing aside some fresh scattered leaves. His blood ran cold. There, half buried in the dirt, was a brass trap medallion. His trembling fingers picked it up, and he knew what he'd see before he even brushed it clean. The crescent brand, his father's mark, the same one that had been on all his hunting gear, the same brand that had been a source of shame and whispered accusations after his father's death. Boone's throat tightened as the implications hit him. This wasn't just a cover-up. Someone was laying a trail, and it led straight to him through his father's legacy. The medallion felt heavy in his palm, weighted with generations of secrets. He stood in the growing darkness, the cleanup job suddenly taking on a more sinister meaning. Deputy Clegg's dismissive attitude, the quick removal of evidence, and now this deliberate plant of his father's brand. It all pointed to something much bigger and more dangerous than he'd initially suspected. The night seemed to close in around him as he realized his position. He'd stumbled onto something dark, something organized enough to have law enforcement cooperation. And now, whoever was behind it was trying to frame him, using his father's tainted reputation as the perfect scapegoat. Boone carefully pocketed the medallion, his mind racing. Tess was the only other witness to the original scene, and Clegg had whisked her away before she could say much. He needed to find her, to compare notes before whoever was behind this could silence them both. The clearing seemed to whisper with menace now, the trees casting long shadows in his flashlight beam. Boone took one last look around, committing every detail to memory. He had a feeling he'd need to remember everything about this place, about this moment when he realized he was being set up. As he made his way back through the darkening woods, each snap of a twig made him jump. The forest that had always been his sanctuary now felt hostile, full of hidden eyes and cruel intentions. The weight of the medallion in his pocket seemed to grow with each step, a burning reminder that he was now caught up in something much bigger and more dangerous than his simple rescue. His father's brand had always cast a shadow over his life, but now it threatened to pull him into a darkness he might not escape. Boone walked faster, knowing that from this moment on, he couldn't trust anyone, not the law, not his neighbors, maybe not even his own memories of what was true about his family's past. The evening had turned cool, but it wasn't the temperature that made him shiver. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to clean up this scene and plant that medallion. Someone wanted him tangled up in whatever web of crimes was being spun in these woods, and that someone had the power to make evidence disappear and the law look the other way. As Boone emerged from the tree line, he cast one last glance over his shoulder at the clearing. In the gathering dusk, it looked peaceful, untouched, as if the morning's events had never happened. But he knew better now. Under that peaceful facade lay a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local authority, and he was being drawn into its center. The medallion weighed heavy in his pocket, a constant reminder that his father's past had somehow reached out from the grave to entangle him in present dangers. Whatever was going on in these woods, whoever was behind it, they'd made a serious mistake in trying to frame him, because now he had no choice but to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, not just about these traps and Tess's ordeal, but about his father's connection to it all. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees as Tess paced back and forth on Boone's worn wooden porch. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from pure anger. The scrubbed-clean trap site and Deputy Clegg's dismissive attitude had left her feeling powerless, but she refused to let that feeling win. "I won't let them sweep this under the rug," she declared, her voice fierce despite her still healing scratches. "Someone tried to kill me out there, and that kitten. Something's very wrong with this whole situation." Boone leaned against the porch railing, his weathered face thoughtful. The Bobcat had a tracking collar. That means someone's monitoring it, probably a wildlife researcher or rehabilitator. "Then that's where we start," Tess said firmly. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "There's a wildlife rehabilitation center just outside of town. Someone named Iris Navarro runs it." The drive to Wild Hearts Wildlife Rehabilitation took them down winding back roads. The modest facility sat on several acres, surrounded by mesh enclosures and natural-looking habitats. A hand-painted sign showed a heart encompassing various animal silhouettes as they pulled up. A dark-haired woman in mud-stained work clothes was carrying supplies toward one of the enclosures. She turned at the sound of their vehicle, her expression immediately guarded. "We're closed to visitors," she called out, not moving closer. "If you found injured wildlife, call the emergency number on the website." Tess stepped forward, determination evident in every movement. "Are you Iris Navarro? We're here about a tagged Bobcat kitten." Iris's sharp eyes narrowed further. "And what's your interest in one of my releases?" "That kitten led this man to where I was trapped and bound in the woods," Tess said bluntly. "Someone tried to kill me, and now the evidence has vanished. That Bobcat might be our only lead." The wildlife rehabilitator's stance shifted slightly, her professional distance giving way to focused attention. She set down her supplies and approached them, studying their faces carefully. "Come inside," she said finally. "But I warn you, if this is some kind of game or waste of my time, I've got 36 animals that need my attention more than your story." The interior of the main building was organized chaos, filing cabinets crammed against walls, medical supplies neatly arranged on metal shelves, and the soft sounds of recovering animals from back rooms. Iris led them to a small office, clearing stacks of paperwork off to chairs. "Tell me everything," she commanded, settling behind her desk. "Start with the exact location and time." As Boone and Tess took turns relating the events, Iris's expression grew increasingly troubled. She turned to her computer, pulling up tracking data with swift keystrokes. "The kitten you saw, female, about 8 months old, released 2 weeks ago, has been showing unusual movement patterns," she explained, turning the monitor so they could see. "Every dawn for the past week, she's been near the old limestone quarry. That's not normal territory behavior for a young bobcat." "The quarry?" Boone leaned forward. "That's Keating land now, isn't it?" Iris nodded grimly. "Randall Keating leased it last year. Claims it's for future horse facilities, but there's been no construction activity I've seen." "Who's Randall Keating?" Tess asked. "Only the biggest name in horse country," Iris replied, her tone bitter. "Old money, older influence. The kind of man who thinks his bank account puts him above the law." She paused, considering them both carefully. "The kind of man who might have friends in law enforcement." The implication hung heavy in the air. Boone thought of Deputy Clegg's Too Smooth manner, the mysteriously clean trap site, the familiar brand on that brass medallion, the tracking data, he said slowly. Could it show if there's some kind of pattern? Something that might explain why the kitten keeps returning to that area? Iris turned back to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. Charts and maps populated the screen as she analyzed the data. The movement patterns are definitely constrained. Almost like she's being drawn back to something, or someone, or trying to help other animals, Tess suggested quietly. "Like she tried to help me." Iris's fingers stilled on the keyboard. She looked at them both, her professional detachment cracking to reveal fierce determination underneath. "If someone's using my rehabilitation work as cover for illegal hunting or trapping, I want them stopped. But this is dangerous territory you're walking into. Keating has friends in high places. We need your help," Tess said simply. "You know the land, you know the animals, and you have access to data that could prove what's happening. And you're already involved," Boone added quietly, "the moment they used your tagged bobcat." They made this your fight too. Iris stood up and walked to a wall covered in photos. Rescued animals. Successful releases before and after rehabilitation. Shots. Her fingers traced the edge of one showing the Bobcat Kitten in question. Healthy and alert just before release. I've spent years building this place, she said finally. Fighting for permits, scraping together funding, earning the trust of both the animals and the community. She turned back to face them, her decision evident in her squared shoulders. But I didn't do all this just to look the other way when something's wrong. She returned to her desk and pulled out a topographical map of the quarry area. There's an access road here that's officially closed but still passable. The tracking data shows the kitten frequently using this ridge line to approach the quarry edge. If we're going to investigate, we need to be smart about it. No rushing in blind. When do we start? Tess asked. Dawn tomorrow, Iris replied. Already? Marking points on the map. That's when the kitten's movement patterns are most consistent. We'll need to be in position before first light. She looked up at them both. And understand this. I'm not doing this for either of you. I'm doing it for that kitten and all the other animals that might be suffering because of whatever's happening on that land. Boone nodded, recognizing in Iris the same fierce protectiveness he felt toward the wilderness he'd spent his life in. Fair enough. We'll follow your lead. They spent the next hour planning their approach, with Iris sharing her knowledge of the terrain and wildlife patterns. She marked potential observation points and discussed the legalities of monitoring private property from public land. Remember, she warned as they prepared to leave, Keating's not just wealthy, he's powerful. If we're going to expose whatever's happening, we need hard evidence. Photos, video, documentation. And we need to be absolutely careful about how we get it. Tess squared her shoulders, the afternoon light catching the healing scratches on her face. They tried to silence me once. I won't let them do it again. As they walked back to their vehicles, Boone glanced at the enclosures where injured animals were healing under Iris's care. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Sometimes healing meant fighting back against whatever had caused the injury in the first place. They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop well away from the quarry the next morning, early enough that even the baker wouldn't be in yet. As Boone drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were poking a hornet's nest. But seeing the determination in both women's eyes, he knew there was no turning back now. The mystery of the brass medallion with his father's brand still weighed heavily on his mind. Someone was trying to frame him, to tie him to whatever dark business was happening in those woods. With Iris's help and Tess's fierce refusal to be silenced, maybe they could finally uncover the truth, not just about the trap site, but about all the secrets hidden in the shadow of Keating's influence. The sun was setting as he pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows through the trees. Somewhere in those woods, a tagged Bobcat Kitten was moving through the gathering darkness, her collar steadily recording data that might help expose whatever sinister operation had nearly claimed Tess's life. Tomorrow, they would begin following that electronic trail, no matter where it led. The old limestone quarry loomed before them in the pre-dawn light, its weathered walls rising like pale ghosts against the dark sky. Boone Ellery killed the engine of his truck and sat quietly, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. Beside him, Tess Mariner leaned forward, her eyes scanning the shadowy landscape ahead. In the backseat, Iris Navarro checked her wildlife tracking equipment one last time. Remember, Boone whispered, his voice barely audible above the early morning crickets. We're just looking. If we spot anything suspicious, we document it and get out. No heroics. Tess shot him a sideways glance, like when you found me in those snares. The memory made his jaw clench. That was different. We don't know what we're walking into here. The kitten's signal is strong, Iris muttered from the back, her eyes fixed on her handheld tracker. It's been in this area consistently for the past week, always around this time. They stepped out of the truck carefully, their boots crunching softly on the gravel. The quarry stretched before them, a massive bowl carved into the earth decades ago and long since abandoned. Nature had begun to reclaim it, scraggly bushes and young trees sprouting from cracks in the limestone. Look there, Tess pointed to a narrow path winding down into the quarry. Those tired tracks are fresh. Boone knelt to examine them. After years of working maintenance in the state park, he learned to read signs others might miss. Heavy vehicle, some kind of truck, probably within the last 24 hours. They followed the path down, staying close to the quarry wall where shadows offered cover. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying strange scents that made Boone's nose wrinkle, something metallic and sweet, mixed with an unfamiliar musk. You smell that? Iris asked, her voice tight with concern. Yeah, Boone nodded. Not natural. They reached the quarry floor, where the space opened into a vast clearing. In the growing light, Details emerged that made Boone's heart rate spike. Several deep pits had been dug into the ground, their edges reinforced with wooden planks. Near each pit, metal drums lay on their sides. Bait stations, Iris breathed, her professional detachment cracking. But these aren't set up for local wildlife. Tess moved closer to one of the drums, careful to stay upwind. The smell, it's like rotting meat, but different, exotic. Don't touch anything, Boone warned, pulling out his phone to document what they were seeing. We need everything exactly as we found it. As they moved deeper into the quarry, more evidence appeared. Hidden behind a stack of old mining equipment, they discovered a row of large shipping crates. Each bore stenciled markings in different languages: Chinese, Arabic, Russian, along with wildlife codes that made Iris gasp. These are international transport codes, she explained, her voice shaking, for big game, tigers, lions, exotic species that have no business being anywhere near the Ozarks. Boone felt his stomach turn. They're importing exotic animals. Not just importing, Tess said grimly, pointing to another set of crates nearby. These were smaller, fitted with heavy-duty locks and ventilation holes. They're holding them here. This is a staging area. The scope of what they were uncovering began to sink in. This wasn't simple poaching or even local wildlife trafficking. This was an organized operation, connecting international exotic animal trade with something even darker. Kin hunts, Boone said, the words bitter in his mouth. They're bringing in exotic animals for guaranteed kills. Rich people paying to hunt captured prey that can't escape. Tess's face hardened with anger. Like what they tried to do to me. I wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I stumbled onto their operation, and they decided to make me part of it. A sound echoed through the quarry, metal scraping. Against stone, the trio froze, pressing themselves against the nearest wall. Voices drifted down from above, still distant, but growing closer. We need to move, Boone whispered urgently. Now, they retreated quickly but carefully, staying in the shadows until they reached Boone's truck. Only when they were several miles away did anyone speak. This is bigger than we can handle alone, Tess said, her hands still trembling slightly. We need help. Boone nodded slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Local law enforcement was compromised, Deputy Clegg's behavior had made that clear. State police might help, but they'd need evidence and credibility to make them take it seriously. I know someone, he said finally. Ruth Gell. She used to work for the Forest Service, investigating illegal hunting operations. She's retired now, but she still has connections. More importantly, she knows how these operations work. Can we trust her? Iris asked. She's the one who trained my father, Boone replied quietly. Before everything went wrong. She's tough, smart, and absolutely straight. If anyone can help us shut this down, it's Ruth. Tess turned to face him fully. Then what are we waiting for? People's lives are at stake here. Animals are suffering. We need to act. Boone met her gaze, seeing the same determination that had kept her fighting when she was trapped in those snares. She was right. They couldn't just document and walk away. Not with something this big. It won't be easy, he warned. Ruth's been out of the game for years, and she wasn't exactly friendly when she left it. Getting her involved means pulling her back into exactly the kind of mess she walked away from. Then we'll have to convince her, Tess said firmly. Show her what we found. Make her understand what's at stake. They drove in silence for a while, each processing what they discovered. The sun was fully up now, painting the Ozark Hills in warm golden light that seemed at odds with the darkness they'd uncovered. I'll need to compile all our evidence first, Boone said finally. Photos, locations, the wildlife codes Iris identified. Ruth won't move on anything without solid proof. I can help with that, Iris offered. I've got contacts who can verify those transport codes. Prove they're not supposed to be anywhere near here. And I can describe everything I saw when I was captured, Tess added. Every detail I remember about the men, their equipment, their procedures. Boone nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. The quarry had revealed something far more sinister than any of them had imagined. A network of illegal exotic animal trafficking, kin hunts, and who knew what other crimes, all operating right under everyone's noses. We'll need to be careful, he cautioned. These people have money, connections, and they're not afraid to hurt anyone who gets in their way. We've seen that firsthand. All the more reason to stop them, Tess said quietly. They dropped Iris off at her wildlife rehabilitation center, where she immediately began making calls to her professional contacts. Boone and Tess continued on to his cabin, where they spent hours organizing their evidence and planning their approach to Ruth Gell. As evening approached, Boone sat at his kitchen table, staring at Ruth's phone number on his screen. He hadn't spoken to her since his father's scandal broke years ago. She'd been kind then, in her own gruff way. But she'd also been clear about wanting to leave that life behind. You're doing the right thing, Tess said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Whatever happened in the past, she needs to know. About this, Boone took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, sharp and no nonsense as ever. Ruth, it's Boone Ellery. I know it's been a while, but I need your help. We've uncovered something big, something that needs your expertise. There was a long pause on the other end. Boone, what kind of trouble are you in? Not the kind you're thinking, he assured her quickly. But it's serious. International wildlife, trafficking, hunts, corruption in local law enforcement. We've got evidence, but we need someone who knows how to use it. Another pause, shorter this time. Where are you? My cabin. We've got everything documented. Photos, coordinates, shipping codes. But there's more to it than that. They're not just hunting animals. I'll be there in an hour, Ruth said, her tone shifting from retired to professional in an instant. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't go back to any of the sites. Just wait for me. Just wait for me. The line went dead, and Boone let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She's coming. Tess squeezed his shoulder. Good, because what we found today, it's just the beginning. And we're going to need all the help we can get to bring it down. They spent the next hour preparing, laying out their evidence and making sure every detail was clear. As the sun set behind the Ozark Hills, they heard the sound of tires on gravel. Ruth Gell was about to join their fight, and nothing would be the same after that. Ruth Gell's weathered face remained impassive as she methodically examined each piece of evidence. Spread across Boone's kitchen table, her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her keen eyes missed nothing as she studied the photos, shipping documents, and wildlife codes. This is more organized than typical poaching, she finally said, tapping a finger on one of the shipping manifest. These codes, they're meant for legitimate wildlife transport between sanctuaries. Someone's forged them expertly. Can we prove they're forgeries? Tess asked. With the right documentation, yes. Ruth's expression hardened. We need to catch them in the act. When do these shipments usually arrive? Based on the tire tracks we found. Late night or early morning, Boone replied. They organized a stakeout that very night, hidden in the thick brush overlooking the quarry road. They took turns watching through night vision binoculars. Shortly after midnight, their patience was rewarded. 3 large trucks rumbled past, their cargo areas carefully concealed with tarps. Boone's camera clicked rapidly, capturing clear images of the license plates and drivers. Ruth made detailed notes about times, vehicles, and identifying features. Over the next nights, they documented similar deliveries, building a solid case. This is enough, Ruth declared on the 3rd night. I've got contacts in the state police who aren't on Keating's payroll. We'll deliver everything directly to them, bypass Clegg completely. But before they could act on their plan, disaster struck. Boone was awakened in the pre-dawn hours by the acrid smell of smoke. Flames were already consuming one side of his cabin. He grabbed his emergency pack and headed for the door. But instinct made him pause. That hesitation saved his life as a spring gun snare, cleverly concealed in his escape path, triggered with a sharp crack. The trap caught his shoulder instead of his chest, tearing through flesh. Headlights suddenly swept the woods behind his cabin. The sound of running engines filled the night. Boone dove into a nearby culvert as gunshots shattered the darkness. Bullets pinged off metal and thudded into earth around him. Through the haze of pain and smoke, he watched his home burn, knowing this was no accident. It was a calculated strike meant to silence him permanently. The flames reached his propane tank, and the resulting explosion lit up the night sky. In the culvert, Boone pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder, fighting to stay conscious as more shots rang out above him. Ruth Gell sat at her weathered kitchen table, her sharp eyes studying the photographs spread before her. The morning light streamed through gingham curtains, casting a warm glow on the evidence Boone and his companions had gathered. Her fingers, still steady after decades of investigative work, traced the outline of shipping crates in one of the images. Well, she said finally, looking up at the anxious faces around her table. You've stumbled into something bigger than local poaching, that's for certain. She picked up a photo showing the foreign wildlife codes. These markings, they're used in international transport, exotic game animals. If I had to guess, Boone leaned forward, his hands clasped together. We figured as much, but needed your expertise to confirm it. What we don't understand is how they're getting away with it so openly. Ruth's kitchen felt cramped with all 4 of them gathered there. Boone, Tess, Iris, and herself. Coffee mugs sat cooling on the table, barely touched. The retired investigator's home smelled of cinnamon and old books. with filing cabinets lining one wall and a police scanner quietly crackling in the corner. Money, Ruth said simply. Money buys a lot of looking the other way, and from what you've told me about Deputy Clegg's behavior, I'd say he's deep in Keating's pocket. She shuffled through more photos. What troubles me most is this brand you found. The crescent mark. You're sure it matches your father's old equipment? Identical, Boone confirmed, his voice tight. But Dad's gear was all destroyed in the fire years ago. This has to be a copy, meant to frame me if anything goes wrong. Tess, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. So what do? We can't just let them keep operating. Ruth drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. We need concrete evidence. Photos are good, but we need to catch them in the act. Document the movement of animals. The people involved. She paused, considering. What we need is a stakeout. Iris shifted in her chair. That could be dangerous. These people already tried to silence Tess, which is exactly why we need to be careful, Ruth agreed. But I still have connections with the state troopers. Once we have solid evidence, we can bypass Clegg completely and take it straight to them. They spent the next hour planning their surveillance operation. Ruth's experience proved invaluable, as she helped them identify the best observation points around the quarry and taught them how to properly document everything they saw. They would work in pairs, never alone, and maintain radio contact at all times. That night, Boone and Iris took the first watch. They positioned themselves on a wooded ridge overlooking the quarry's access road, hidden among thick undergrowth. The night was cool, and their breath came out in visible puffs in the darkness. Iris had brought her professional camera with a night vision lens, while Boone kept careful notes of everything they observed. Just after midnight, their patience was rewarded. A convoy of 3 unmarked trucks approached the quarry, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Iris's camera clicked rapidly as they captured images of men unloading large crates. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, speaking in low voices that carried faintly across the still night air. Those crates are moving, Boone whispered, peering through his binoculars. Whatever's inside is alive. Iris zoomed in with her camera, got clear shots of the license plates too. And look, that man giving orders. He's wearing a jacket with Keating's horse farm logo. Over the next week, they maintained their surveillance rotation. Ruth and Tess took turns watching during daylight hours, while Boone and Iris continued the night shifts. They accumulated a substantial collection of photos, videos, and detailed notes documenting the operation's patterns. The evidence was damning. Exotic animals being delivered in the dead of night, professional hunters arriving with expensive gear, and most importantly, clear connections to Keating's legitimate businesses. Ruth carefully organized everything, preparing it for presentation to her contacts in the state police. We'll move on this tomorrow, Ruth announced during their morning meeting. I've arranged to meet with Lieutenant Matthews at the state police headquarters. He's trustworthy, and he's been looking for a reason to investigate Keating for years. But someone must have been watching them. That night, as Boone returned to his cabin after his surveillance shift, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The air carried an acrid smell, and an unusual orange glow flickered through the trees. His heart pounding, Boone approached carefully. As he reached the edge of his clearing, he saw his cabin engulfed in flames. The fire had clearly been set. Deliberately, it was burning too hot, too fast to be accidental. All his possessions, his father's remaining mementos, the backup copies of their evidence, all of it was being consumed by the inferno. A sudden movement caught his eye. A thin wire glinting in the firelight. His years of outdoor experience kicked in, and he threw himself backward just as a spring-loaded gun discharged with a sharp crack. Searing pain exploded in his shoulder as the shock grazed him. Headlights suddenly blazed to life from the trees behind him, momentarily blinding him. More shots rang out, spitting dirt at his feet. Boone didn't hesitate. He dove for the only cover available, rolling into the drainage culvert that ran beneath his access road. The cold, damp metal pressed against his back as he lay there, trying to control his breathing. Water trickled beneath him as more shots peppered the culvert's opening. The headlights swept the area, searching. Boone pressed himself deeper into the passage, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder. He could hear voices now, boots crunching on gravel. Check the culvert, someone ordered. Make sure he's dead. Boone's mind raced. The culvert ran for 30 yards, emerging near the creek bed. If he could move quietly enough, he began inching backward, using his elbows to pull himself along. As silently as possible, the beam of a flashlight probed the culvert's entrance. But Boone was already several yards in, hidden by the pipe's slight curve. His shoulders screamed in protest as he moved, but he forced himself to continue. More shots rang out. the sound deafening inside the metal tube. Bullets sparked and ricocheted, but the curve of the culvert protected him. Boone kept moving, his clothes soaked through from the shallow water. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the other end. Pausing, he listened intently. The voices were more distant now, still focused on the other entrance. With agonizing slowness, he eased himself out of the culvert. The creek bed was dark, sheltered from the fire's glow by thick vegetation. Boone took a moment to orient himself, then began making his way through the familiar woods. He needed to get to Ruth's house. It was the only safe place he could think of. His shoulder throbbed with each step, but the graze wasn't deep enough to slow him down significantly. Behind him, his cabin continued to burn, sending sparks into the night sky. Everything he owned was being reduced to ash. But he was alive. They had tried to kill him, which meant only one thing. They were desperate. The evidence they had gathered must be even more damaging than they had realized. As he made his way through the dark woods, picking his path carefully to avoid leaving an obvious trail, Boone's mind was already working on their next move. They had one set of evidence safe with Ruth, and now they had proof that Keating's organization was willing to resort to murder. The stakes had been raised, but so had the potential consequences for those behind the operation. The night wrapped around him like a cloak as he moved steadily through the forest, every sense alert for signs of pursuit. His years of experience in these woods were paying off. He knew every depression, every game trail, every landmark that would lead him to safety. The sound of voices and the glow of the fire faded behind him as he pressed on toward Ruth's house, where he could warn the others and plan their next move. Dawn found the group gathered in Ruth's cozy kitchen, the warm light a stark contrast to the tension in the room. Boone sat at the wooden table, his shoulder freshly bandaged, while Ruth carefully examined something under a magnifying glass. "Look at this," Ruth said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She held up the brass trap medallion they had found at the original crime scene. "The brand mark. It's not your father's original stamp. It's a counterfeit." Boone leaned forward, wincing slightly from his injury. "How can you tell?" Ruth's weathered fingers traced the edge of the medallion. "Your father's brand had a distinctive nick in the bottom curve, a manufacturing defect that made each stamp unique. This one's too perfect to clean. Someone went to the trouble of making an exact copy, minus that identifying mark. They wanted to frame me," Boone said quietly, the realization settling heavily in his chest. They needed a scapegoat with a connection to hunting. Across the table, Iris was hunched over her laptop, her dark hair falling forward as she scrolled through document after document. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deep into county records. "Got something," she announced suddenly, turning the screen so the others could see. "I've been digging through procurement logs. Deputy Clegg has been authorizing unusual contracts for the past 18 months, all labeled as wildlife disposal services, but the amounts don't match standard removal fees." Ruth moved to look over Iris's shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "Those are payoffs, disguised as legitimate services. Classic money laundering technique." Boone stood up and began pacing, his mind racing back to that first morning when he had found Tess. "When I called on the discovery of the trap site, Clegg showed up almost immediately. He made sure he was first on scene. And when you went back later that evening," Iris prompted, "everything was gone. Cleaned up like it never existed." Boone stopped pacing, his face hardening as the pieces fell into place. "My call gave him the warning he needed. He went straight to Keating, and they erased all the evidence before anyone else could see it." Ruth nodded grimly. "The deputy's been working with Keating all along. He's their insurance policy, controlling what gets investigated and what disappears. That's why nothing ever sticks to Keating," Iris added, her voice bitter. "Every complaint, every suspicious incident gets filtered through Clegg's office first." Boone sank back into his chair, the weight of the betrayal settling over him. A law enforcement officer, someone sworn to protect the community, had not only enabled Keating's operation, but had actively worked to frame an innocent man. The realization made his recently bandaged shoulder throb with renewed anger. "We need to take this higher," Ruth declared, gathering the evidence they had accumulated. "State troopers, federal authorities, someone beyond Clegg's influence. But we have to move carefully. They've already shown they're willing to kill to keep this quiet." The morning light streamed through Ruth's kitchen windows, illuminating the determined faces around the table. The attack on Boone had forced them to look deeper, and what they had found was worse than any of them had imagined. But now they had proof of the counterfeit brand, proof of Clegg's corruption, and proof of a conspiracy that reached into local law enforcement. The deputy's betrayal had been calculated and complete, but in trying to eliminate Boone, they had only succeeded in exposing their own operation. Now, gathered in Ruth's kitchen with their evidence spread before them, the group began planning their next move, knowing that every step forward would be more dangerous than the last dot in the dim light of Iris's observation cabin. The team gathered around a makeshift command center. Laptops hummed, and papers covered every available surface. The Bobcat's collar data blinked on one screen, showing regular patterns of movement that aligned perfectly with Boone's detailed survey maps of the area. "Look here," Iris pointed, tracing a path with her finger. "The kitten's movements cluster around these 3 locations every other Thursday night. That has to be when they're running their hunts." Boone spread his maps wider, matching the coordinates. "Those spots all connect to the old service roads, perfect for moving vehicles in and out without being seen from the main highways." Ruth pulled up the rehabilitation center's records on her laptop. "The timing matches too. We've had an uptick in injured wildlife reports the day after each of these dates. They're getting sloppy, leaving too many witnesses behind, working through the night." They compiled their evidence into airtight documentation. Ruth used her connections to arrange a meeting with state police investigators, carefully bypassing local channels that might alert Clegg. The response was swift. At dawn 3 days later, state troopers descended on the quarry property. Their timing was perfect. They caught several of Keating's men in the act of unloading exotic animals from unmarked trucks. From their hidden vantage point, the group watched as officers led away handcuffed workers. Better still, during the raid, investigators discovered a hidden office containing detailed ledgers of the operation, dates, prices, client names, and shipment records. "They're actually doing it," Iris whispered, gripping Boone's arm. "They're really taking them down." The evidence was overwhelming. By nightfall, 6 arrests had been made, and the state police had seized computers and documents that would take weeks to process. For the first time since this all began, a genuine sense of victory settled over the group. Their careful work and collaboration had finally paid off. "We did it," Tess said softly, watching another police vehicle pull away from the quarry. "We actually did it." The peaceful afternoon shattered with a scream from the rehabilitation barn. Boone's head snapped up, his heart freezing as he recognized Iris's voice cut short. He bolted from the house, Tess right behind him, but they were already too late. A black SUV peeled away from the barn, kicking up gravel. Through the tinted windows, Boone caught a glimpse of Iris struggling in the back seat, Deputy Clegg's firm grip restraining her. Keating sat in the passenger seat, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. "They're heading for the old logging roads," Tess shouted, already running to her truck. Dark clouds rolled in as they pursued the SUV into the back country, thunder rumbling overhead. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they followed the winding dirt road. Deeper into the wilderness, Boone gripped the dashboard, his jaw clenched tight. He knew these trails. They led to a network of old quarry access roads where anyone could disappear. "There," he pointed as the SUV's taillights flashed around a bend ahead. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the steep drop-offs on either side of the narrow road. The rain was falling harder now, turning the dirt to slick mud. Tess handled the truck expertly, but they were falling behind. Boone spotted a shortcut through the trees. "Stop here. I can cut them off on foot at Miller's Ridge." He jumped out before Tess fully stopped, sprinting through the underbrush. The path would save precious minutes if he survived it. Rain plastered his shirt to his skin as he ran, branches whipping his face. He never saw the trap. One moment he was running, the next a hidden snare caught his ankle, yanking him off his feet. The force of it flung him over the ridge edge. His stomach lurched as he plummeted, then jerked to an agonizing stop, dangling above a 4-foot drop. To the rocks below, pain shot through his leg as the wire bit deep. Blood trickled down his ankle. But he forced himself to focus. The wire was cutting into him, and he could feel it starting to fray. He had seconds to make a choice. Below, he spotted a slope covered in brush. It would hurt, but it beat the alternative. Drawing his pocket knife, Boone cut the wire. He crashed through the branches, rolling and tumbling until he slammed to a stop at the bottom. Every inch of him screamed in pain, but he forced himself up. Iris needed him, limping but determined. He pushed forward through the storm, following the sound of engines in the distance. Blood mixed with rain as it ran down his leg, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The tracks led to an old railway tunnel, its dark mouth yawning before them in the storm-lashed darkness. Lightning illuminated the weathered stone archway, revealing decades of abandonment. Boone's trained eyes caught fresh scuff marks on the gravel. Clegg and Keating had gone inside, likely planning to wait out both the storm and their pursuit. There, Boone whispered to Tess, rain dripping from his face, "And they've got Iris." He reached into his remaining gear and pulled out a wildfire flare, standard equipment from his former profession that he still carried. The tunnel's confined space would amplify its blinding effect. Years of handling these during fire seasons had taught him their power. Moving silently despite his injuries, Boone crept forward. The tunnel's darkness swallowed them, but he could hear voices. Echoing ahead, Clegg's smooth drawl bounced off the stone walls, followed by Keating's sharp commands. "State police will be here soon," Keating was saying. "We just need to hold out until—" Boone struck the flare. Brilliant magnesium light exploded through the tunnel, reflecting off the wet walls in a searing flash. Startled shouts and curses erupted ahead as Clegg and Keating were momentarily blinded in that chaos. Boone caught sight of Iris, bound but alive, against the tunnel wall. He surged forward as Ruth's voice boomed from the tunnel's other end. "State police, drop your weapons." The trap had sprung perfectly. Ruth and the troopers had circled around while Boone drove their quarry forward. But Clegg, even blinded, began firing wildly. Bullets ricocheted off stone as Keating scrambled toward an ATV they'd stashed inside. The engine roared to life, headlight cutting through the smoke from the flare. Keating gunned it straight at Boone, aiming to crush him against the tunnel wall. Boone dove for Iris, rolling them both clear as the ATV thundered past. Rain-weakened timber supports, rattled by the gunfire and vehicle's vibration, began to crack ominously overhead. The tunnel was coming apart around them. In the days following the tunnel confrontation, justice moved swiftly. Deputy Ward Clegg stood before the county commissioner, his polished badge now a symbol of betrayal as it was formally stripped from his uniform. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Years of falsified reports, concealed crimes, and blatant corruption, all meticulously documented in Randall Keating's detailed ledgers. The prosecutor had called the ledgers a blueprint of corruption, each entry damning both Clegg and Keating further. The books revealed everything: payments for silence, coordinated cover-ups, and the deliberate framing of Boone Ellery using a counterfeit version of his father's brand. When the truth about the brand emerged, it sparked a formal apology from the county. "The Ellery name stands cleared," the commissioner announced at a press conference. "Mr. Boone Ellery's actions have exposed a criminal enterprise that threatened both our wildlife and our community's trust." The Wildlife Division chief approached Boone with an official commendation, but Boone shook his head. "I appreciate it," he said quietly, "but I didn't do this for recognition." Instead, he accepted their offer of a position with the wildlife unit, knowing he could do more good working officially to protect the creatures he'd grown to care about so deeply. As dusk painted the sky in soft purples and oranges, Boone and Iris stood at the edge of a clearing, watching as the rehabilitated Bobcat family prepared for release. The mother cat and her kittens, now fully healed, paced restlessly in their carriers. "Ready?" Iris asked, her hand finding Boone's. He nodded, and together they opened the carriers. The Bobcats emerged cautiously, their wild instincts already drawing them toward the shelter of the brush. The mother went first, her kittens following close behind. Within moments, they had vanished into their natural habitat, free and whole. Boone turned to Iris, seeing in her eyes the same mix of emotions he felt: joy, pride, and something deeper that had grown between them through all they'd faced together. "Stay with me," he asked simply. Iris smiled, squeezing his hand. "Always. We'll build something good here, something honest." Together they watched the gathering darkness. Their shared commitment to truth and justice, as natural as breathing, they had found in each other not just love, but a partner in protecting what mattered most. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.